Amazon has everything for back to school. Zebra lunchbox? Check. Cool Adidas gear like t-shirts, shoes, and backpacks? Check. Triceratops folders and pencils? Check. Laser Cat t-shirts? Check. Get your back to school shopping done now at Amazon.com/back to school and enjoy free shipping on millions of items. No need to leave your home or hassle with crowds. Amazon.com. No better place to get everything back to school from A to Z.
Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a byte or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launching. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney the Viking Shortridge, co-host, Melinda the Raven Jackson. Want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. Also, a shout out to the Connor sisters. Hats off to Misty and Ashley. They are the founders of SOS Sisters of Salem Paranormal Research Society and host of their podcast, Paranormal Party. You can find them on Facebook under Paranormal Party. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal question or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922. Or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight, along with my beautiful raven, Melinda Jackson. First off, I'd like to give a shout-out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal. You know, it sounds like I don't ever know your name. I know, I'm going to have to fix that. Well, tonight our special guest is Varla Ventura. Varla is the author of Varla Ventura's Paranormal Parlor, Ghosts, Seances, and Tales of True Hauntings. That came out this past June. She is also the author of 5 other books on spooky stuff. I hope I'm saying that right. That's what they sent me. Banshees, werewolves, vampires, and other creatures of the night. The Book of the Bizarre Among the Mermaids, Beyond Bizarre and Fairies, Pukas. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
Pukas. I don't know what a puka is, but I bet I'm going to learn tonight. And changelings. She can often be found lurking about in the deep, dark woods and lakes of Minnesota, on the hunt for beastly things and hidden history. You can visit her online at www.Varla. I just lost her name.
Varla.
I want to get me some glasses, man. VarlaVentura.net. It's VarlaVentura.net. Man, I am just slow tonight. So how was your week?
Busy at work.
Why is your week always busy?
Because I do loans. I'm in money.
Can't you like be doing like, you know, last weekend I went to the strip club and you never guess what happened. You know, can you not give us one of them stories?
No, I quit that a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to quit, Roddy.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get on with our guest. It's my honor to welcome our special guest, I can't say her name right.
Varla Ventura.
Varla. Why am I having trouble with that? You think with my name being Berlin, I could say Varla.
Just go with that.
Varla. I want to start calling her V or double V. Varla Ventura. And thank you so much. Oh, she's giggling. That's a good sign. Because most people, when I mess up their name, they're like, "You son of a bitch, what the hell? Can't you say my name right?" No. Apparently, you didn't get the part where I said I'm from the Appalachian Mountains.
Well, thank you. That was quite the introduction. I'm just waiting for my cue. Thank you for having me. That's, some people think, and maybe you're onto something here, that if you say my name 3 times, I appear in a mirror to haunt you. So, kind of like Bloody Mary. So, maybe you're onto something. Maybe you shouldn't say it 3 times in a row.
I'm having a hard time saying it 1 time.
You can call me V. Very, very special people to me call me V. And so you may call me V if that is easier for you.
That is awesome, because I don't know why I'm looking at it and it's just not resonant. You think it'd be easy, Varla, but why am I like, grow up? It's like I'm getting, it's like I want to call you something else and it's just not coming out.
It's okay. I've been called worse.
Oh, God, that too.
Definitely called worse.
God.
Also excited to know that, we can cuss, huh?
Hell yeah, that make it,
Hell yeah! All right. Let's get this party started. This is gonna be good.
She got me all tingling all everywhere now. love it when I have a guest on and they'll slip and they'll say, damn, oh, well, I don't supposed to say that. I'm like, oh, you can say whatever the fuck you want to say. And they're like, all right, fuck this shit.
Well, so many radio shows. I've kind of trained. I do have a sailor's vocabulary most of the time. So I have trained myself though since over the last, I guess it's been 10 plus years of doing radio interviews to like not say those words or try real hard not to, because so many of them have to comply with FCC regulations, which change. And I do have one host who doesn't have his show anymore, but he has become kind of a friend of mine. And when I was meeting with him, and he said, yeah, you did actually, you did, I don't remember what I said. I think I said fuck or something like that. And he was able to dump it in time, but it was on like a public radio station. So for him, he had to he had the delay. So now I feel much more relaxed now that I don't really have to be, don't have to be ladylike.
That's right. You can unbutton your pants and undo your blouse and enjoy the ride.
And no one will know.
I tell her
it's not a video interview. There's no camera on it.
Yeah, I tell everybody I sit here in my thong underwear with a Bud Light. So.
Damn it! I forgot my Bud Light. I didn't know.
But she remembered her thong.
She remembered her thong. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Hey, nowhere to put it, but I got it.
All right. Well, since we started off that way, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am wearing pants. I am wearing pants tonight. Yeah, well, you got it right. You read my bio wonderfully. I have several books out. I will tell you about pukas. They're super fun. And I grew up in California, in the foothills of California, mostly between the San Francisco Bay Area and the kind of Gold Rush foothills. Spent a lot of time. I had a little bit of an unusual upbringing in that, my mom's basically a witch, and she's not a witch like, hey, everybody, let's get in this circle and, well, I mean, she is a witch like that, but it wasn't really an active thing that we were exposed to. We were just sort of exposed to things. And I'm sure growing up in Appalachia, you can totally relate to this. Herbal remedies, some folklore, a lot of old fairy tales, and, we had Halloween stuff around all year round. And the other thing that we did that it turns out a lot of people don't do in my family, we all spent, and I have 5 siblings, we all spent time in cemeteries. We would, grab a sandwich and sit in a cemetery and eat it. We would go for picnics. We would go for walks. Of course, on Halloween, every Halloween, we would walk through an old pioneer cemetery. But we also would just go to cemeteries and look at all the headstones. And several of my sisters and myself, it's just something we've just enjoyed doing. And we don't look at it as a sort of morbid thing. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to look at the old names and find what you think might be the oldest headstone. It's a game we'd always play. It's like, find the oldest headstone in the cemetery. And, I think I found it. This one's from like 1801. Oh, no, this one's even earlier. So, and my mother was also a big influence on me because she always had, she was very interested in the psychic arts and the occult. And so she always had a very interesting library of books that I had access to by, either by snooping or by, eventually they were on the regular bookshelves. So in between the, Andersen's fairy tales and Mother Goose, you might find a book by Aleister Crowley, something by Dion Fortune, books about tarot, books about, just different scrying and all kinds of things along those lines. So I kind of grew up with that being, a pretty normal thing for me. So it for me, that evolved really into an interest, especially in folklore, in storytelling and magical creatures and kind of weird history, and also sort of the history of seances and the psychic arts, which my most recent book kind of gets more into that. So it's a collection of ghost stories and haunted places, but it also gets into sort of the history, especially in the United States, of the use of psychic arts and its place in sort of late Victorian society and what that meant, especially for women who were able to use the psychic arts in ways to kind of break out of the confines of what would have been a normal kind of upstanding citizen type life. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
It's cool that your mom's a witch. I got a witch sitting right here beside of me.
Hello.
All right. Good company. Good company.
Yeah.
I keep good company. So,
with the Bud Light and song, you must attract like the pretty, pretty good times there. You're gonna regret saying that, yeah.
I always regret something I say. So what started you on the path, to become a writer and, to write about so many different paranormal, creatures and events?
Well, believe it or not, I always wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. I mean, I was the kid that, you get those assignments where the teacher, those sensory assignments, and the teacher says, okay, we're going to give everybody 10 minutes to write, to sit out on the field or whatever, and you're supposed to write, the things that are around you and what you're observing. And I would write 10 pages. I would write, and the other kids would be like, I want to go play on the playground, and I would sit there and I would write 10 pages. And so there was I always just had this interest in writing and I started reading at a very young age. So but the funny thing is, like most of us, you don't really have any idea what you're actually going to do with your life until you're, halfway doing the thing you don't want to do. And that's when you figure out, oh, maybe I should actually. And so at some point I realized that I could actually write about things that were interesting to me, and things just sort of fell into place where I started with the Book of the Bizarre, and it's a collection of, it's like one of those stories that I read in my grandma's basement on summer vacation in the, collection of Ripley's Believe It or Not, old ghost tales and Tales from the Crypt and a little Stephen King, so I wanted to write a book that was something that I would enjoy reading, or little things that it's really a collection of, and that was born out of pretty much me constantly busting out weird random facts, and just sort of collecting things like that. And then someone said to me, that would actually be an interesting, that might be an interesting book. And so we kind of put that into when that one actually did well. So then I was able to do Beyond Bizarre, and that did fairly well. And then I just collaborated. I've been with the same publisher for all the books. I have a really close relationship with them, Wiser Books. And I just collaborated with them on some other ideas, collections of folklore, and that's where we got Among the Mermaids. And then all my books have really long titles. So whenever I send someone like my bio, I'm always like, should I just do the first couple words, because it all kind of sounds like one long book, really, if you're, I try and put paragraph spaces. I did a book on banshees, werewolves, and vampires and other creatures of the night, and that was a really fun one to do. And then last year I put out Fairies, Pookas, and Changelings, and so that's kind of all about sort of the fairy kingdom and some weird and wild creatures. And then just did the Paranormal Parlor one most recently. So for me, it was just sort of like, kind of worming my way into a relationship with the publisher and getting lucky with the first one, and then being able to just continue to write with them. I mean, I've never published with another publisher. We have a great relationship. They get the books, they get the design, the interior design always of the books always kind of exceeds my expectations. The cover any author will tell you when they get their first cover image from the publisher, it's kind of a cringe thing because you don't know what it's going to be like, you know, and for many authors, unless you're wildly popular, like someone like Stephen King, you don't often have a say in, you know, your publisher is trying to create something they think is going to do best in the marketplace. So you don't always have veto rights on something like that. But a publisher like mine, you know, if you hate it and you're in tears, they're not necessarily going to publish it, or, you know, they might go back to the drawing board a little bit because they don't want you to be unhappy. And as an author, you have to be happy and stand behind your work and promote it. You don't want to be embarrassed by it, right? And that is, so it's always this kind of, oh, what are they going to do? And in the past, you know, I had seen some of the covers in a preliminary stage. And so when I got the cover for the most recent book, I thought, oh, God, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? And all the other book covers, well, the Among the Mermaids, Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, and Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires were all designed by the same man who passed away last year. So shout out to Jim Warner. He was an amazing cover artist and art director and artist. And so he didn't do this last one, and I was kind of like, oh, what's going to happen? And when I got it, it looks like a poster to me, and I think it's actually based on an old kind of theater poster for this magician. And I just, like, I think my knees kind of buckled a little bit because I was so incredibly happy with it and just so pleased with how it looked. And then when I got my first book, there are all these tiny little things that they did that I had no idea. There's little hidden symbols in the cover and on the spine and things that you don't notice until you hold the book in your hands. And so I was just really, really lucky that, you know, the team there, we have the same taste. We like weird stuff, or, you know, they know what they're doing. So that's kind of just how I was able to publish as many books as I have. They're almost kind of made to like match each other, and it's just been a good relationship. So I hope it continues. If anybody from Weiser is listening, I hope it continues. I just have to figure out what to try next. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Hello, Varla.
Hi.
My first question is, have you had any unexplained or paranormal experiences that's left a significant mark on your life? And if so, can you describe those?
Well, yes, I have had many from a young age. And I think that in addition to sort of the environment that I grew up in, I think having those at a young age and then sort of periodically throughout my life. And to be honest with you, I've always been a collector of other people's stories. Started out like I started collecting other people's stories along with some places and some classic ghost stories, and, you know, just had kind of like a something I was building off of. And as I began, kind of the core of the book is where I talk about the sort of the spiritualist movement, and we can get into that a little bit later. But from that, I'm kind of building off all of these things. And then the way that I write is I kind of know, like, my general map. Yeah, and my table of contents is more or less mapped out, but I haven't, you know, written all of it to suit that. So I have all my little sections. So sometimes I work on different sections. So I might work on one chapter or the chapter about like haunted places. Then I might work on another chapter. And then I had other people's stories that were coming in, several people that I approached and asked if they would be willing to contribute a story. And I kind of put those in the places that they seem to go in with the, you know, the theme of the chapter. And then I go in and I weave that all together, and I kind of write my introduction to each chapter, and I write, you know, just kind of make sure the flow is going and just sort of weave everything in. So I'm copying and pasting from, you know, 22 documents that I've created with all my different notes and writing. And I guess I hadn't realized how many, it sounds kind of funny because I've always been interested in this stuff, how many experiences I'd actually had. until I started putting my own experiences down onto paper and putting them in the story in different contexts. So, I mean, I had things from when I was very young, and I saw, things kind of at the foot of my bed, to as a young adult, I had a few experiences of being. I have many experiences of sleep paralysis, but I've had several experiences of like just kind of being touched on the forehead, or being, the bed kind of pressing down, where, the way like almost like a cat was on the bed, but I didn't have a cat at the time. A lot of things like that. I haven't had a lot of visual, like, oh, I see a ghost standing right in my door. I have had just sort of more that feeling, and sometimes heard things. I've had a lot of, I think it's called clairsentient, where you can kind of, for example, someone that I loved passed away, and that night I could smell her perfume as I was falling asleep, as if she had just, slipped through the room on her way, to shuffle off this mortal coil. And I've also have had a few things where I looked down a hallway and I saw someone walk. It looked like a person walking, and then there was nobody there. And that turned out later that was a haunted floor of a hotel that I was staying at, and I didn't really know that. So I've had, a lot of, when I started adding them up, I was like, wow, I've really actually had quite a few experiences. And several, one thing that really shaped me, I think, and I talk about this in the book, I started dabbling with the Ouija board at a pretty young age. We got it as a gift from our parents at Christmas, my sister and I. And so I, we was like, oh, is that Monopoly under the tree? Same shaped box and everything. And it was a Ouija board. And so my sister and I, we would do it here and there. Like, are you moving it? Are you moving the planchette? Is that you? Kind of looking at each other. Who's moving that? But over time, as we started doing it, we actually started getting a lot of words and reactions, answers to our questions. So I think that at one point we made contact with something that said it was a little girl. There was a grave on the adjoining property, sort of a lone pioneer grave, and it identified itself as that little girl who was about our age. And at that point, my mom, and she would sometimes like direct it. She wouldn't put her fingers on the planchette, but she would be like, kind of act as the medium, like ask the questions. So anyway, one time she walked in and we're sitting there and she said, who you're talking to? And we said the name of the little girl, the girl on the grave. And my mom just got this strange look on her face, and she just walked over and she picked that board up. She snapped it closed. You could hear the little plastic planchette inside, but kind of snap on it. And then she tucked it under her arm and off she went. And, a little later, she sort of offered us a half-hearted explanation of being worried that we had, she said something to the effect of, you aren't equipped to deal with something that, might come through. And later, as an adult, we talked about it, and, she doesn't remember taking the board away or what happened to it, so she says. But she said that she did remember that incident, and that she felt like that things can impersonate something like a little girl, but it's actually not. It's some other kind of entity or spirit or something trying to get through. So she just kind of, I don't think she expected us to actually make contact in that way. And I think it just sort of, red flag, freaked her out. And so she got rid of it. And the thing about that I remember is that my sister, she was my older sister. So she was not, I was always the scaredy cat, right? And so she had this look on her face where she was really freaked out. So I knew she wasn't, it was a genuine look, so I knew she wasn't moving it, and I knew I wasn't moving it. So I talked to her about this recently. I sent her the book, and I said, you remember this? And she said, oh, yeah. And I remember being really, pretty freaked by the whole thing. And I don't remember being freaked. I remember being like, well, let's keep doing it and see what it says. just like being very curious about it and very interested in it. And I think that incident, which I remember so clearly, shaped my interest in the paranormal in a many ways, because it kind of opened something for me that I wanted to know more, and I wanted to know, why is it scary? What is this, thing that we shouldn't be doing? Just, like any kids, you take it away from me. Now I'm even more curious. And so, I did some reading about that as I got older, of course, not at 7, but as I got, more into like my tween years, I got a hold of some material that explained a little bit more about the spirit board and what its purpose was. And, so throughout my life I've been really interested in it. And with this book, it's really kind of the crux of this book is the paranormal parlor, like the idea that you sit down around a table and you play these paranormal parlor games. And so I think, like, for me, that those things kind of, it points directly to the interest that I have that, resulted in this book and sort of things that I am interested in my life in general.
Oh, cool. Well, what's your opinion about demons and angelic beings? Do they exist, or are they
cool
fairy tales?
I don't discriminate.
Well, have you had any personal?
Depends on my mood.
I like you, but you can go.
Yeah, right now I'm feeling a little bit more demon. I have only really had one. I'm kind of fortunate in that realm that I've only really had one experience that made me wonder if it was something other than what I was communicating with. Was that something a little bit more demonic? And I was using the Ouija board, and I was in the basement of a Victorian, and I was under the influence of a substance. So it was like totally all the bad things put together in one scenario. I was using the board alone. I was pretty young. I was a teenager. And I went in the basement of a house where a bunch of young people were living, and it was kind of this cool, funky old Victorian, but it was notorious for having this. Nobody wanted ever to go in the basement. So there, series of things that I probably shouldn't be doing. And there was a point at which, like, the board was really kind of moving on its own, and I kind of, that actually scared me. I kind of freaked out, and the board sort of flipped over, and I just ran up the stairs, and it was a real weird experience in a not good way, but other than that, I haven't really had I think there's more than just ghosts, for sure. And I've had a close relative tell me that in the hospital that he saw this light come into the room, and when the light got closer, he could see that it was like hundreds of tiny little sort of angelic-like beings hovering over him in this kind of beautiful light. And he looked at them and he said, "Just not yet. I need a little more time." And, he passed away, I think, 4 days later. So he just wanted to have a little more time to say goodbye to his family. But he kind of knew, and he told me that because I think he knew I would, not freak out or think that was weird. But, I don't think that, I don't discriminate against different, I think there's a lot of different kinds of creatures and beings and things out there, and that also that people are also unique. So they have unique experiences with the paranormal as well. And of course, ghosts are unique because they are some of them at least were once living. So you have, great diversity. I'm not super obsessed with, and I just mean like as a writer and of my interest, I'm not super obsessed with angelic or angelic beings or demons especially. I do like to read about them, and I do love hearing people's encounters. And there's so many things, and you find this also in like the fairy kingdom, it's so hard to define one thing, because what somebody might describe as a Sasquatch, somebody else might call the Wendigo. There's just so many different ways of interpreting it, and we're all so unique in that. But I welcome most things. I've never had something like poltergeistly scratching me or any kind of thing like that. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist or people don't have those. I just, am kind of lucky in that my experiences have all been very positive.
Okay.
So what is your opinion of people claiming to be possessed by a demon? And do you think people can also be possessed by an angelic being?
Well, there's a lot of interesting history of people going into trance and channeling magical material, including Aleister Crowley, who wrote his Book of the Law basically under a spell in a Egyptian pyramid. I think that people can channel all kinds of things. So I feel that those experiences are pretty valid, and I think it can happen. Just like some people are more easily influenced to do something that their gut is telling them not to do, or to hang around the wrong creepy dude or whatever against all the warnings. I think that there are people who are vulnerable in certain ways, and I think that actually relates back to kind of what my mom was concerned about, that children can be vulnerable to that, and that, you see a lot of the demonic possessions happening to, like, teenagers, which is a very chaotic time, even for a well-adjusted teen who actually still talks to his parents or her parents. That's still a very chaotic time. There's so many things happening to your body. There's so many different perceptions you're having the world around you. You're 1 foot in the adult world and 1 foot still in the child world, and you are still legally a child. And so there's so many things happening. So I think that that's a vulnerable age, and especially for something like possession. Now, that being said, I think that there are a lot of old stories that are basically, call him a witch. There's a on the cow died. Okay, it must be that, kind of pretty but iffy girl that nobody will talk to from the house down the lane. So I think there's a lot of history of people blaming vulnerable members of society or labeling them as witches or vampires or some other kind of pariah, and being possessed, and that goes back to, the history of sort of oppression towards anyone who doesn't fit within the norm of whatever the society is expecting at that time. So I take a lot of the older stories of possession with a grain of salt, or like a whole freaking cauldron full of salt. Because you've got the church trying to take over land. You've got all kinds of things that happen in history that overlap it. So I think, those stories, I like to read about them and think about the perspective. And, just as I'm very interested in the history of witchcraft and, the Salem witch trials, the witch hunts in Europe. And it's interesting because when I wrote Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, you will find that especially especially werewolves, but also with vampires, they share a lot of that history of the witch hunt and people who were persecuted and accused of being things that were supernatural when they were, actually just trying to, just do their own thing, or they had a lot of land, or they were healers, or maybe, again, they didn't fit, they were recluses that lived in, lone castles or whatever. They just didn't fit the norm. They didn't fit what, like, at that time the church was telling everyone people were supposed to do and be. So I think you find kind of a matched history, especially in like Europe in the 1600s, with the accusations of and instances and accounts of werewolves. You find that overlapping with the witch craze and the witch hunts. It kind of got labeled. It's like, well, if we can't call you a witch, then we can probably get away with accusing you of being a vampire or a werewolf. Today, we welcome that.
Yeah.
You say that like it's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And plus, too, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the women that were killed, they were killed because they were midwives, and they were taking away the money from the doctors, which is reason why a lot of the women were killed. It's called witches.
That's a really good point. They were healers, and they knew how to use the herbs, and they had home remedies, and so those things all became associated with something negative. And they just wanted you to do it the man's way. I mean, no offense, Rodney, but like that's kind of, there was definitely that. I mean, that's still a problem. I think we can all admit. But absolutely. And then you also had women who were, maybe they were widows and they had a big piece of land, and so they were wealthier than other people in the area. And so, how do you get that land? You just accuse them of being a witch and burn them, and then the estate goes to the state, or it goes to the taxpayer or the tax man. So there's so many horror stories like that. I mean, those are the true horror stories, right? Like, that it's not about what's hiding under your bed. It's it's about who might come knocking at your door.
You're right.
So you were talking about vampires. Can you tell everyone about vampires, and have you ever came in contact with one?
Yeah. So, like many of us, my original introduction to vampires was, probably Bela Lugosi was the first time I saw like a vampire movie, in Dracula. And then, later I read Dracula. Now I've read it like a million times. Such a, Bram Stoker's Dracula. But from that, I learned a lot about, we know that, and that's a work of fiction, and we know that fiction writers can, you can take a little from this story and a little from that lore, and you mix it together. So I learned a lot about the history of vampires and the relationship that vampires had, and what influence that had on the Dracula that we think of today. That there was actually a relationship with a wealthy landowner, or wealthy landowners, especially in parts of Eastern Europe, where you had, the Romani would have this agreement that they would be able to stay on the land, and the wealthy landowner wouldn't kick them off, and would allow them to sort of live in peace in that area, but that they would actually send someone to be a donor to the vampiric desires of this landowner. Now, I also, just in working in the paranormal and doing, in addition to writing, doing some editing and working with some other writers, have been introduced over the years to people who identify themselves as vampires. Perhaps they have a family history, they come from Romani background, or they just, have always been interested in it. And it's interesting in many ways. Some people approach it from a very magical point of view, not unlike Wicca, that you have this sort of, you have certain holidays that you recognize. You have sort of a magical process in which you learn to, you kind of learn to awaken your powers. And some people identify as, actually they do blood rituals. Not all vampires are actually, they like blood in sort of a romantic way, but they're not all blood givers. It's more of a energy. There's a lot of energy vampires and psychic vampires. And I have a couple that are friends, and yeah, a conversation with them can be draining. But, with vampires we have, and in the book I kind of cover like everything from old kind of superstitions about vampires, and the idea of, so a lot of the vampire lore, and I don't want to say there aren't vampires and there weren't vampires, but a lot of the vampire lore does come from a time, especially I would say like in Scotland and parts of the UK, where there was a lot of medical research happening. Also in like, parts of Europe, Germany. So you had doctors who were trying to learn about the human body and the systems and everything that was happening within the human body, but they weren't privy to the knowledge that we have today. In fact, the knowledge we have today is built on that. And so they would try and, operate on cadavers and dissect cadavers to learn more about what the body actually looked like and to make detailed sketches. Well, there was a period of time that is, pretty gruesome time when, basically a doctor's not, if you can't get a legitimate cadaver, you might on the sly in a back alley slip some money to a couple of grave robbers who would then go and be able to deliver a corpse to you. In addition, you had people who were grave robbers. They were just, straight up looking for the rings. And so some of the vampire lore of the vampire sitting up in the coffin with the arms crossed, that kind of rises up. So that was a traditional way to cross arms to sort of lay a person at rest. But there's a aspect of rigor mortis that can actually cause the body, like it's kind of in this coffin, and depending on the timing, they might spring up out of the coffin a little bit, and so it would frighten a grave robber, and then they would declare that person was a vampire, and then if you broke into the crypt and the body wasn't there in the middle of the night, then you knew that, they were really a vampire, which can account for, the body actually being stolen. So there's some interesting things like that actually play into the vampire icon that we have today. All of those things have kind of fed over the years, all the different ways that we look at kind of the modern vampire and what we think of as the modern vampire. So it's there's all kinds of different aspects to it. And the vampires that I know, actually, and one in particular, two in particular, I would say that they fall in the category of like healers and empaths and people who are highly, highly sensitive and have a lot of psychic abilities and are very, very highly sensitive to other people's feelings. And so because of that, they require other people's emotions and reactions to kind of give them strength. And they will then find themselves going down the path of being, kind of more of a formal vampire and an ethical vampire where you would have a donor. I mean, it's kind of like an S&M situation where you have somebody who is willing to be a certain role because they get what they need out of that, so the donor. And then you have the person who is the vampire who's like feeding off of that, and it's a mutually agreed upon situation. Vampires who will try and do that, on the fly in a bar or whatever. But that's kind of the modern vampire, and I find them to be very, very kind people, actually, and very concerned with the world around them and how people are doing, and often give back a lot to the community, but also like to get dressed up and, put in some fangs and rock out at a vampire, party or a ball. So, I don't know, it's fun. It's for me, I've never been able to kind of fit myself into any one specific group or category. I'm more of a researcher and collector of things, and I know what I like and what interests me, and that's something that interests me, and I find it beautiful and fascinating. But it's not a lifestyle that I ever chose for myself.
Well, what can you tell us about legends of werewolves? I mean, since you have done so much research on all this, I'm just going to pop you off with questions like this, make it easy.
So one of my favorite things that happened when I was writing about the book with banshees, werewolves, and vampires is that I stumbled by happenstance upon a massive old book. I'd have to look in my book to tell you. Actually, I have my book right here. I'll tell you what year it was published. It's probably in the bibliography. It better be. It's a book by a man named Sabine Baring Gould. And what I love about this is Sabine Baring Gould is actually most well known for writing the hymn Onward Christian Soldiers. He was a reverend who lived in England and traveled around the world, sort of, converting and preaching and writing and kind of collecting folklore. And so he, I'm just gonna ballpark it in like the late 1800s because I can't find it right now and be distracted looking in the book. But he wrote this book called The Werewolves, and it's spelled a little differently. I think it's spelled like WERWOLVES. So it's missing like the E, the common E that's in there. And so it's super interesting because he spent a lot of his, I want to say it must have been his time on the side. So he's traveling around and he's establishing, churches and talking with people. And he traveled a lot in, so you're thinking like this is like the late 1800s. They're basically trying to convert everyone into like nice, polite Christianity. And, he was based in the Church of England. And so he traveled around all around mostly Europe and some of the stories, I don't know if there's too many actually from the UK, but most of them are from Scandinavia and some of the northern, Norway and Finland, as well as Eastern Europe and parts of like Russia. So, werewolf stories. And the werewolf stories are everything from just sort of writing down what somebody told him to talking about the legend of things that he calls lycanthropic streams. So lycanthropy is actually the medical term for somebody who believes that they're a werewolf. And lycanthropic streams, he talks about these streams that you would drink from and it would turn you into like this ferocious werewolf. He also talks about, different rituals. And so I'm kind of reading some of these things and it's sparking all of these other things that I had read. Like, I remember a number of years ago, there was this wonderful National Geographic that was dedicated to basically pagan rituals that are still being reenacted, and things like people doing before a battle or before an important harvest or at certain times of year, doing big bonfire and donning skins of animals and kind of doing a ritual around the fire and doing dancing and chanting. And so you have these kind of like pagan rituals. Well, in those Nordic countries especially, you had a wolf population. So whereas in the Americas you might have seen more like bear or something along those lines, that would be the symbol of power. You had the wolf because there was just a higher wolf population. And you find this also in the more northern United States and up into Canada. You have more indigenous lore that involves wolves. And so he would kind of witness thinking, there's a lot, even in Ireland, you put these crazy like outfits made out of straw on. So I'm imagining, from the lens of the people who are collecting these stories, the way that this is interpreted as a threat and some kind of weird thing. And, oh my gosh, these people transformed into werewolves. So that's one end of it. But on the other end, you have something where people do these rituals and they do go into trance. You also have the story of like berserkers who were like they would get completely crazy before they'd go into battle. They would don these skins and they would paint themselves all crazy and they would actually just get crazy and whoop. And some people think that they would drink some kind of what we think was more of like a natural amphetamine or something like that to just like get themselves all hyped up, and they would go into battle and they would just terrify anyone that they were up against, because they were completely crazy. They were berserk, and that's where we get the word berserk today. So you have a lot of that with werewolves. You have, so that's kind of the other end where people are actually going into trance. You also have medical cases of people believing that they're werewolves. You also have, even today, you ask anybody who works in an ER and it's a full moon, and on the full moon, they get that's when the real weirdos come in. You probably ask a bartender and they would tell you that, like, full moon, this is when all the loonies come out. We have a relationship with the moon as humans that there is something that happens to us. We are, partially water, right? So we're reacting to, it's pulling the tides, it's also pulling us. So we have this idea of transforming, and that the werewolf comes out at the full moon. One of the things that Sabine Baring-Gould actually talked about that was really interesting and also a little bit infuriating was the idea that anybody could, this wasn't the infuriating part, but that any one of us who has ever had that moment where you just see red and you just go mad and you kind of just snap, and maybe you go over the edge, maybe you don't, maybe you have self-control, maybe you don't, maybe you completely freak out. I mean, I think we can all relate to that because we have that in us, that is evidence that you could go further and you could actually transform into something much more beastly. And he even talks about people who are like serial killers, and he talks about Jack the Ripper and the connection between this idea of just going completely overboard and how we basically all have the capacity to turn into werewolves. He also then goes on to talk about how he compares it to pregnancy and pregnant women. So that's kind of the infuriating part, where he's like just talking about, like, women going crazy when they're pregnant and, demanding all of these things. But he does his point when you kind of take, okay, historical context or whatever. When you think of it, you can think of the way that, hormones do for all of us play, they play a part in how we react to things and how we handle things. And so you can kind of see, and then you also have, things like diet and what people were eating and how that can affect your hormones and how that can affect your well-being. So you have all these different things. You have werewolf legends, you have werewolf rituals, you have medical diagnoses of werewolves, and then also, a lot of evidence to suggest that we're all crazier at the full moon. And, all these things kind of come together to provide sort of a backdrop for the idea of a werewolf. And I think what I love about werewolves, and what we all kind of love about werewolves, like we lust after the vampire, right? We want that vampire to come in our room late at night. But the werewolf, he breaks our heart. He doesn't really want to be this scourge on society. He can't control himself. It's the moon. It's a curse. It's a disease. And we feel sorry for him. And so we kind of empathize with him. And I think, we all have that kind of, but he doesn't mean to hurt he didn't mean to kill her. It's just kind of, it's the moon. So I included in the book this wonderful, sweet story of this man. It's just very romantic. It's short. It's by Eugene Field, who was a fairy tale writer in the early 1900s. And he just writes about this, it's just called The Werewolf. And it's this sweet little story about this man who's completely in love with a woman, and they're getting married, and they live in this little village, and he loves everyone in the village. And then once a month, when he can kind of feel it coming on, he bans himself, and he leaves, and he goes away to the woods and stays away, and he hunts animals or whatever, but he keeps away from the people that he loves so that he doesn't destroy them. And you could really get into a lot of allegories there about what that means and the sign of the times and things like that. So that's kind of, I think werewolves are super complex when you start kind of pulling apart all the rituals, and then of course there's just a ton of great stories and accounts, and there are accounts of people seeing like the Beast of Bray Road. Bray Road is in Wisconsin, and there have been sightings throughout the years up through the 60s, and I think even a few more more recent, unproven in some way. I mean, you know, there's just somebody's word for it, but people who have seen something, they're driving along the road and they see this thing and it looks like a human, but it's also a wolf. So there's a lot of sightings of werewolf-like beings that are out there, you know, probably not quite as elusive or looked for as something like Bigfoot, but definitely something that's out there. And, you know, in different cultures, you have different kind of variations on that, like the chupacabra and things like that.
Okay.
Well, I have a question, you know, since we're talking about werewolves, you know, like you said, you know, the story of the werewolf, you know, with the moon and everything. Well, you have the Lugaroos, and they're more like shapeshifters. They don't need the moon. They don't, right. They can just, you know, change on the fly, you know. What is your opinion about those?
No, that's a really good point. And I talk a little bit about them with us that I'm glad you brought up the shape-shifting, because that's another aspect of the werewolves that is really important, that we have our kind of more, I guess, Hollywood version of the werewolf that we have in our mind that looks like a wolf and, you know, teen wolf or whatever. But there's a lot of evidence and stories about shape-shifting in many cultures, especially cultures indigenous to the United States or North America. You have a lot of stories of shape-shifting, and shape-shifting is, you know, being able to shape-shift into another animal. So sometimes with the werewolf, it's not always just a wolf. I mean, there's like were-dolphins. So you have some island nations who have similar stories, but it's a were-dolphin. So it's something that kind of is partially human and transforms into this other creature, or was once human and then was banished for some reason, and it's kind of more of a supernatural being. And I think you have a lot of connection between shape-shifting and shamanism and the kind of transfer that you need to do in order to shape-shift or leave your body. So so that's a really good point. It's not always connected to the moon. It's not always connected to a once a month thing. But I think that there are, our lore that we have today is built on the lore of yesterday and the lore of the yesterday before that. And somewhere along the line, especially with the European stories, you have a super ethnocentric, church-forward kind of lens on, original rituals and sort of pagan beliefs. And in the United States, we also have, you know, so many of those things that are sort of fetishized, but in our history, all we wanted to do was stamp them out. So, especially in Louisiana, there's some really, really interesting stories about creatures that are in the swamps, and down in Florida, you have some very similar things like that. And I think there's no one. I think they're all kind of. It's kind of like with fairies, like what one person might call a goblin, another person might call a brownie, but based on where you are, there are kind of like the equivalent. So it's sort of like the counterpart, depending on what part of the world you're in, and you just find instances of them all around the world. And I found that to be very true with werewolves, and true with mermaids, and true with vampires to a certain extent, but very, very true when you're getting into like the fairy kingdom and folklore along those lines.
Have you researched or had any experiences, as far as like Bigfoot or UFO encounters?
So I haven't done a lot of research into Bigfoot. I find it very interesting. I think there are Bigfoot people that get really into it. But I have a couple of stories. I have a UFO story, actually, and I don't really talk about my UFO story much, but I will totally tell you my UFO story, because where I grew up in California, actually in that part of California, when we first moved there, we moved there in like the early 80s, and we had lived in the Bay Area prior to that, and we moved up there, and was kind of up in the California foothills, up around the nearby town it's called Nevada City, but it's in California. And I know that there had been a lot of people who had experiences, and my sister actually once went camping with a group at a lake called Lake Faux Cherie, and it's kind of up in the higher part of the Sierras. And they had a group sighting where all of them saw the same thing. So my UFO story is basically that it's a classic teen on the hood of a car story, but since we can cuss, I guess I can tell you this part. So there was basically like a peak. Gosh, I hope my parents aren't listening to this. There's a peak up past my parents' house. We live kind of outside of town. And I was up there in, my parents' car, big old station wagon. And I was up there with my boyfriend at the time. And we're teenagers. And so we're parked up there, and it's beautiful. You can see it's this great, great place. It's just like you can see from one ridge to the other, and you can see stars for miles. There are no lights out there. I mean, if you see a light, it's from really far away, like somebody's house, like, I don't know, 15, 20 miles down in a canyon. There's not electricity up there. It's actually off the grid completely. So you don't have street lights. You have no light pollution, and it's gorgeous, and it's just the best place to go and just look at the stars. Well, we weren't looking at the stars at the moment, but so we're up there and we're just kind of making out on the hood of the car and pausing once in a while, looking for shooting stars and making wishes and getting to know each other and all that kind of stuff. And as we're kind of kissing, we look out and we see this light, and it's a red light, so it stands out because it's not like all the other red lights. And our first thought is that it's an airplane or whatever, and it's just kind of a trick of the light that it seems like it's kind of low. Okay, well, and also keep in mind, in the interest of full disclosure here, this was also an era in which a lot of people were growing marijuana. And so there were a lot of, at the time they called it CAMP, and I can't remember that stood for, Citizens Against Marijuana Patrol or something like that. And they would fly over these helicopters in this rural area to look for these fields. Anyway, so we were used to helicopters flying over now and again more often than planes. And so we thought, it'll be a helicopter because the way it's kind of hovering low. And we don't hear any sound. And so we're not hearing like the echo of that, but we don't really think too much about it. Keep making out, look up again, and it kind of, is that closer to you? Yeah, that definitely looks closer. So we're kind of looking at it. It seems like it's getting closer, but in a kind of like coming toward us way, not in a not in a way that an airplane would go. Like, how could it be flying at us? It's too low. So okay, whatever, still making out, and we look up again, and it's like, that really looks like it's getting closer. And we just kind of stop, and we decide to just sort of like sit there and watch it for a minute. And we're watching it, and it kind of like as we're looking at it, it kind of like blinks. It's like once or twice, and then it just sort of stays there. And then it is close. It's definitely coming closer, and we're not hearing a sound. We're not hearing a sound of a helicopter. We're not hearing the sound of an airplane. This was pre-drone, so just to date myself and age myself a little bit. It's pre-drone, so it wasn't like some kid with the drone, or so we're just like, okay, this is weird. And then I don't know, we just both at the same time just got a really bad feeling. We got a real bad feeling, and we looked at each other and we said, you know what, let's get the hell out of here. And we jumped in our car, and we zoomed down the hill and just kind of got away from there. We drove pretty far. We were only going, we drove at least like 10 miles away before we kind of stopped. So I had kind of not forgotten about it. I always remembered that experience, but, many, many years had gone by. And, I hadn't told a lot of people about it. It was just kind of this experience that we shared, and we had talked about it, and we remembered it exactly the same. So fast forward, many years, 10, 15 years, and, we get in touch again on Facebook, as you do, and he sends me this video. And he just says, I hope you're like, Like you're gonna freak out. And this video is somebody else's video from the same part of California. And what they're filming is exactly what we saw. It's not the same time that we saw it. It's not the same night or the date. But it's an old video, oldish video, that probably was taken as an actual video, that they've, put on, I guess, whatever, they must put it on YouTube somehow. And anyway, so it's the same thing. It's this red light, and it's doing the same thing. And you can hear the other two people in the video kind of saying, like, is that getting closer to us? I don't hear any sound. And it was so exact, the blink, it was so exactly the same strange thing that we saw. Really, that actually kind of freaked me out. It was like, wait a minute, what? Somebody else saw the same thing, and they videoed it, and it's exact, and it was just brought it all back to me, just the whole experience of seeing that and that feeling that you got like something was just really, really wrong. So I didn't, that's pretty much my only real UFO story. It was definitely an unidentified flying object, and it was definitely coming toward us, and we didn't stick around to find out what would happen if it got really close. But we had this feeling like it was watching us, like it knew that we saw it. That's how we both felt. And in spite of teen hormones and all of that, we called it, and we just got out of there. So I think that's saying something.
Trying to warn you all, stop it.
I know, it's like, is that my dad?
Like,
Did
oh,
my dad
no,
plan some elaborate thing? Like, somebody's dad was in there. Yeah. Have you guys had a UFO experience?
Wow. I have.
You both live in Appalachia? You both live in Appalachia? Yeah.
Yeah, we live in Virginia, and I've had quite a few. I know the last one I had was last summer. I was sitting on the porch with my mom, and it was about July. It was about this time of year. And it was about 10 o'clock. It was dark, and I was talking about UFOs and stuff, and don't talk about that stuff. They ain't no aliens. Blah blah blah. All of a sudden, over the mountain, you see this red light just slowly going across the sky. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And, she's, it's just an airplane. I said, but that airplane's moving awfully slow. And all of a sudden it stopped, and then it started going backwards. And Mom was like,
oh, no.
She was like, I've never seen an airplane do that. I said, well, me either. I didn't know they can fly in reverse. And she's like, oh, my gosh. And I said, just keep watching. Then it went behind the hill, and you didn't see it no more. And we just kept watching outside. And all of a sudden, there was like a big explosion in the sky, like somebody had set off a firework, but it was way, way, way up in the air. And she's like, fuck this shit. I'm going in the house.
Yeah. Wise woman.
And she told me, she said, I don't want you to ever talk about none of this stuff around me no more. I'm like, okay.
Okay. She had it. Oh,
yeah,
no. But you've had more than one then, because you said the most recent one was just last summer. So it sounds like you've had a number of them.
Yeah, I had one when I was a kid. We was actually in the car, and Mom was in the car, and my dad, and we're driving, and it was one of those triangle with the red, green, and yellow light that flew over the mountain where we was at, and we was driving, and it was down low. You can see it was just a black triangle with these lights under it. And Dad, I asked Dad, I said, is that an airplane? He said, nope, no airplane I've ever seen looks like that. I'm like, what is it? He said, don't know, don't care, don't talk about it.
Pedal to the metal.
That's
wow.
it.
Yeah, and that's freaky. That's close.
Yeah, that's one thing about living around here. I've experienced a lot of things, and a lot of people that I know have, and some haven't. But it's really interesting in these mountains. These mountains are very old.
I know that there's a lot of probably you know it better than I. So many similarities to some of the folklore from Appalachia and some of the folklore from like the early folklore from Ireland and Scotland, and some of the fairy creatures and some of the just the beliefs and superstitions, rituals, whatever you want to call it, that probably carried over from people immigrating, but also, you didn't bring all those creatures with you. I mean, they found similarities and probably why they stayed in that area because of these similarities. But a lot of interesting things just along the lines of like some of the little kind of like little kind of house fairies, like the little hobgoblin type thing. Some people call them hobgoblins, some people call them brownies, and they're a few feet high, and they'll clean your house for you if you feed them properly, and they might clean out the barn. And there's a lot of interesting kind of lore and sightings around things very similar to that. So I find it really interesting to just kind of talk with people who grew up in that area, because it's one thing when you read about it, but if you grew up there, you probably, without even knowing it, experienced things or knew people who had experienced things just by living there.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating. I know when I was growing up, the area I lived about 40, 50 miles from where I grew up, but the mountains down there are a lot steeper than they are here in Tazewell. But I'd go up in the mountains, and I would see people or a person that was on the other side of the ridge, and I told Dad about it, and he told me, he said, well, next time you see him, stop and ask him who he is. And I did, and the guy just smiled and just vanished right in front of me, and I'm like, well, shit.
Oh my gosh.
Then, ran off the mountain. I've heard, I've read it too. At least he smiled. That's exactly what I thought. But I've heard Bigfoot, the screaming of the Bigfoots around here. I actually was going hunting one time and ran into two, and everybody always says, when you're hunting, why don't these hunters ever shoot them? Well, when they're like 8 foot tall, and you're looking at them, and you're looking at your gun, and you're thinking, yeah, this ain't gonna work. That's a big.
Probably don't want to piss it off, right?
Exactly. I don't want
to back away slowly. Don't make eye contact.
Well, me and this one made eye contact, and I backed up. It backed up, and we both slowly backed up. And it's one of those moments where you're thinking, please don't come at me, and you're trying to keep your shit in your side. You're trying not to lose everything.
Right.
I mean,
right. You start shaking after. I'll shake later.
Yeah.
I gotta get through this.
Yeah, and you shake terribly. I mean, where you have that adrenaline rush and that fear and just everything. You're like, I'm about to lose everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing I think you have a lot of probably are because of the history of mining in the area. There are so many. Oh gosh, there's so many interesting stories about things that guarded the mine, the Tommy knockers in the mine, different kind of sort of dwarf-like guys that kind of lead you. Now, so some of the stories that I even found in like parts of, so a lot of the miners came from Cornwall, right? Like you have that Cornish tradition. And where I grew up, there's tons of mines because it was the gold rush. And closer to where I am here, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, they had a lot of copper mines, and so people from Cornwall settled there as well. But there's something in the mine, the idea that there's either a guardian, or it could be something that isn't helpful, something that you need to leave a little offering for, something that leads you out and lets you know when there's going to be a cave in, but also all the people who have died in those mines, and that kind of history that imprints itself, and the kind of ghosts that appear out of something like that. And when you drill a hole way deep down into the earth, you never know what you're going to hit. And I feel like that's a whole, that's something that I would love to. I feel like that is almost maybe not a whole book in of itself, but it could be. I mean, just a history of mines and mining lore. I have a little podcast, and I'll probably hit you up when I get to V, because I hit you both up. I'm going state by state. I haven't gotten very far because I'm going alphabetically. I've only gotten to California, so it's kind of a slow process. But I'm going alphabetically state by state and interviewing people. Either they're, a paranormal investigator, or they know a lot about the something really unique to that area. So it's not all necessarily paranormal stories. I have my Arizona one is a guy who was the curator of the pharmaceutical museum at the University of Arizona. And he kind of talks about all the strange items that they have and the history of, some of the poison bottles and things like that. But the very first interview I did, it's not the first it's not the first one alphabetically, but the very first interview I did was with a woman up in Alaska. And she did talk about some of the mines and some of the things that people have seen, these sort of black dogs that guard the mines. And that usually when you see these black dogs, you know that there's actual treasure in there. And so it was like this belief that if you saw the black dog, it was actually like, okay, then it's almost like an X marks the spot. But at the same time, if you saw it, it might frighten you off because it was sort of almost like a hellhound. They're often described as like something that was guarding the door and, not looking particularly friendly. So I think that's a very interesting topic, and and then of course then you have all the just ghost stories, and just there's something about what kind of seeps out of the mountain in those ways.
Oh, you're right, because all my family were coal miners, and I worked in the mines for a year, and then I worked at a tipple for a year, and that was loading coal trucks. And you wouldn't believe the stories that these miners have told, and things that like you said, with the offerings and stuff. And it's funny that you mentioned as far as the Scottish heritage. I've got Scottish in me, and also Cherokee, along with Melungeon, which is a race of people that they found here in the Appalachian Mountains. I don't know if you know the history of this, but they were here before the white settlers came.
Okay, so there's probably a whole, just sitting around your family table, there's probably some pretty interesting stories about. And the other thing that Appalachia has is like incredible music, right? There's like some incredible, such a unique sound that is coming out of that area, even back in the 20s and 30s when things were starting to be recorded, and so much of that has a sort of Irish or Scottish. There's like a Celtic element to a lot of that. A lot of the fiddle based and the kind of songs about. These got kind of wonderful romantic folkloric songs in which someone usually dies or someone's hung or things like that. I've just done some, that's the kind, I like that kind of music, and I like those old sort of like folklores and folk songs and sea shanties and things along those lines. But I like to learn the lyrics and then find out what they, what's the story behind them. And there's a wonderful songbook that it's like Joan Baez's songbook. But what's so great about it, it's all these old songs that she would sing, most of which are these like classic folk songs, either from America or the UK or different parts of the world. But in each song, before you read the song or see the sheet music, there's like a paragraph kind of describing where the song came from and who wrote it and what was the context in which it was written. So I know we're getting like way off from like paranormal stuff, but I just think it's really, so I'm going to hit you up when I get to V, because I think you both would be really interesting guests. So I might not wait until I get to V alphabetically if you're open to that, because I would love to talk to you more about, just the mines and just living in Virginia and the folklore and all the rich history there.
Oh yeah,
especially the cool paranormal stuff and all the like crazy Bigfoot stories, all that stuff.
I'll be happy, and I'm sure Melinda will be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, see?
Awesome, great.
What you need to do is just come here, sit on the porch, drink some tea, and we'll sit and shoot the shit.
Now that sounds like way to do it. So I want to tell you what a puka is, because you brought that up in the beginning, and I would be remiss if I if suddenly it were midnight and we hadn't revealed what a puka is to anyone who doesn't know. And when I tell you, I think what's going to happen, especially based on what you said, you're probably going to know what a puka is, or know a similar kind of creature that's been described to you if once you know. But the puka is essentially a sort of a trickster fairy. Most prevalent in Irish folklore, called a puka. It's spelled a number of different ways, and it's usually seen in the shape of a goat, a rabbit, or a horse. You might find the puka along a road as you're stumbling home from the pub and you stayed out a little too late. And the puka will be this, seems like a horse alongside the road, and then it's got glowing eyes and it's all black, and the next thing you know, you're on its back and you're going on this mad ride that takes you to the edge of a cliff and back, and then sort of drops you in a ditch, not far from where you met it. And it sort of shakes you up. The most famous puka, at least in the United States, the most famous puka is Harvey, the puka from the Jimmy Stewart movie, the big white rabbit that he talks to. And he even calls him a puka. His character, what is his name? It's like Elwood P. Dowd. And his deal is that he's the town drunk and he's an embarrassment to his sister. And he doesn't care. He doesn't give a shit what people think about him. And so he's the tall white rabbit, and it's sitting next to him at the bar, and he talks to it, and he has a conversation. Well, what's that, Harvey? And what'd you say? And he has this whole conversation with it, and everybody looks at him, and he just looks like he's talking to nothing, and he looks crazy, and he's just this town drunk. So pukas love to play on the town drunks because nobody will believe that they're real, and it kind of messes with them. So I feel that pukas are tricksters, but they're not necessarily malevolent. Although people of weak nature have been known to be driven, off of a large cliff or something when they just, out of fear. But they're really not malevolent. They're really they exist as any trickster does to shake things up. So if you encounter a puka, there's a little lesson to be had there. You're going on the wrong path, and so you need sort of, I don't want to go so far as to say lighthearted, because, it can be pretty terrifying to the person who has the encounter. But the puka is there to sort of shake you out of your path and whatever you think you're doing. So maybe it's to keep you from staying too late at the pub like you're not supposed to. Or maybe it's just that, you need to reevaluate just where you are in your life, and it could be maybe you're not happy with your life and you need to change it. But so often it's I love that the puka they prey on drunks because nobody believes them, and then they become a laughing stock, and that's sort of the joke. So there's this very trickster-like element to the puka, and it totally ties in with shape-shifting. You don't have too many instances of a puka being a wolf, but you definitely have a handful of other creatures, occasionally like some kind of bird. Most often, though, you will have and sometimes even like a raven is considered a puka or called a puka. But most often it's a rabbit or a horse in almost all accounts. And it's kind of, I think the original kind of horse puka evolved into something like the headless horseman, because it's a riderless horse. It's a horse without a saddle. It's a horse without somebody riding. And there's even some accounts in Wales, there's some descriptions of something very puka-like, that the carriage sort of arrives, and if you see it, it might mean that it's sort of in the way that you would see death. So you would see like a carriage drawn by a black carriage drawn by 4 black horses, and that there's the puka, and it's waiting for you to, to come aboard. And of course you would want to resist that. So there's a little tiny bit of like lore indicating that it might be sort of a harbinger of something to come, like death, but more often it's sort of there to just kind of shake things up and, let you know that you went the wrong way late at night. Don't go that way anymore.
Oh, okay.
The strangest or weirdest story that's ever been told to you by someone while you've been researching through your book?
Oh my goodness. So many weird stories. And whenever you're on like a show like this, then after that, you always get emails or messages, or sometimes, on shows like Coast to Coast where they have like the callers call in, you get some real weird stories. I've had there's so many. One that's probably kind of stands out. So many of them are like beautiful. Like someone calls and tells me this experience they had where, they, their grandparent arrived in their house and they could smell the perfume, and then they found out that person had passed away right at that moment. A lot of like lovely, very personal things like that. But one of the weirdest ones, which still kind of freaks me out, and it's in my most recent book, and we still haven't gotten to the bottom of it, but the friend that told me this story recently contacted me and said, I might have found this. I heard a story. So it takes place in Northern California. In that part of Northern California, the original people that were there's kind of an overlap between Maidu and then Nisinan. And so he was at like something, I don't know, some kind of storytelling thing, and heard a couple of stories that seemed to connect with the story that freaks me out. And I think, like any good ghost story, the setting has so much to do with why it might frighten you. And for this story, I was told it in the very place in which it happened. It took place on a mountain that my friend grew up on. And, you say you grew up in Appalachia, you know every square inch of the woods around your grandparents' house, right? So he he bought the property next to his grandparents' property as an adult later in life. His grandfather was no longer living, but his grandmother still lived on that adjacent property. But, that was all woods then. It was owned by someone, but nobody lived there. And so he used to just wander and wander. So he knows every square inch of that. Lived there most of his young life, and then came back to live there as an adult, and bought this property and was building a house. And there's a little cabin on the house, kind of like a shed over a well, where that he had fixed up nicely and could stay the night. So he would come and he'd clear brush and work on the site where they're going to build this beautiful house. And he's there by himself one night. And his then girlfriend, now wife, was at the apartment that they had together. And it was getting late, and he had, called her, I'm going to stay the night here so I can get up in the morning and work on the property again. It's like a Friday night or whatever. And he's there by himself, not unusual. This is somebody that I have known most of my, since I was a teenager. He's an archaeologist by trade. So he's got a scientific brain. He's also very open to things, but he doesn't always, let that bleed into his work because, he's an archaeologist. He has to approach it scientifically. And he's done all kinds of crazy things that are very daring and, spelunking in caves. He's been all over the world and had these pretty, some pretty amazing experiences. So when somebody that you feel like is the guy that you want next to you when the zombie apocalypse comes, when he tells you something that freaked him out, that right there, when that person says to you, I don't even know if I want to tell you this, I don't even know if I want to talk about it, you immediately, of course, you're like, you have to tell me now, but you're also immediately like, oh my gosh, this is even more scary than I could imagine if it scared you. So it's kind of like, if you see your parents scared for the first time, you're like, why are you scared? Now I'm scared. Are you scared? I'm not scared. So he tells me the story that it's working late at night, and it's just kind of starting to, it's getting that twilight time. So I had time to call it, crack a beer, call it a night. Too dark to work. And he's kind of settled down in his little casa that he's got there. And just as he's settling down, he hears this moan. And I'm going to actually see if I can just find the description, the way that he describes this moan. I've got it right here. I was just starting to kick back when I heard it. A loud, long, and low moan. My immediate thought was that it was a sound traveling up from the valley below. There is a farm there that has miniature burros, and they've known to make strange noises, especially to the unaccustomed ear. Within seconds, however, it was clear that this was no donkey. A low note began again, resonating in a way that is almost indescribable. It was guttural, or the lowest of a baritone range, so low that the cabin and the ground, the items in the windowsill, all began to vibrate. There's a musical term, hemisync, when a sound is felt more than heard. So at this point, he's starting to feel like, what is this? Okay, is this just some kind of crazy joke? A friend's playing on me? Could this be an animal? All the logical things that go through your mind. Like you said with the Bigfoot encounter, you're just trying to deal with the moment, right? You're not thinking you're just like, okay, this is happening. This is how I'm going to get out of it. So you're using logic. You're not thinking, oh my God, I'm toe to toe with a paranormal being, right? You're just like, oh shit, I got to get out of here. So he has the thing's rattling, and then it stops and it doesn't echo. And he notices that right away because it's a valley. So there's, it's up on top of the hill. So most sounds carry an echo. You can shout and it'll echo for miles. And it just stops dead, like as if it had never happened. There's no echo. There's no reverberation. And then it starts again. And this time it's closer. And the things are rattling, and he's kind of like, he'd start to peers open the door a little bit, and then it kind of starts again, and he's like, I'm going to shut that door, and he's hearing it again, and it's getting closer, and he's just thinking, what is this? What can it be? He says, it was as if the sounds were in a vacuum. There was no echo or lingering resonance. It just stopped. There was no further noise of crashing bushes, no rustling in the woods. I crept up to the door, and I, a grown man who's traveled the world spelunking in underground caverns and sleeping overnight in legendary haunted boathouses, began to feel as frightened as a little child. All the while, he's still trying to rationalize, what is this sound? Like, this has got to be something. And then it stops again, completely truncates. Again, no reverberation. And as you can guess, it begins again, and this time it sounds like it's basically right out cabin. It's shaking the little walls and the things on the windowsill, and it just seems like it's just coming from right around the cabin, and it's just the most guttural and strange noise that he cannot explain it. And he feels like he says it's probably about 100 feet away at this point. And then he says the bellowing sound grew nearer still, and things in my cabin went from vibrating to rattling, as if a small earthquake were taking place, or a tractor was raging past. The sound was growing stronger and stronger, now not more than 50 feet away, coming from the midst of a stand of black oaks just below the cabin. And then it stopped. There was no lingering echo, no rustling leaves, crunching twigs, or branches breaking, nothing. The sound simply ended. And that's so then the next day, he has a conversation with the neighbor who describes a very similar sound from I think he talks to the neighbor like a couple days later. And not the night my friend heard it, but the following night, the neighbor heard something very similar, which ended with a splashing sound into his pond. So we don't know what this was. And also now keep in mind that I'm going to go sleep in this freaking cabin. He's going to sleep in the shell of the big house that they're building. He and his wife are going to go in there, and I'm going to go sleep in this cabin after he's told me this totally freaky weird story. And again, growing up there, he'd never had experienced anything like that. So we're trying to figure out, okay, was this a banshee? Is this something like moaning? Did something happen after this? Did somebody fall ill? Did somebody die? We can't quite figure it out. Could it have been something Bigfoot-like that, had the ability to just truncate the sound because it was supernatural? So most recently, it's a little bit of a TBD to be, to be decided what it was, because he was at an event and he heard some stories, and he mentioned to me that there, he had texted me and he said, I just came from this event and I heard these stories from some elders, and we'll have to talk, because I might have a little bit more of a clue of what that was. And it was about some of the things, some sort of supernatural creatures that were believed to live in those woods in that part of California. So that part is kind of to be continued, but that was one of the more freaky stories and really more frightening stories, because, someone that I love and trust was telling me this story. And I was told it in a setting in which was, now I'm going to go, try and lay me down to sleep over there. That's going to be pretty freaky. And also, I think any good freaky story starts in sort of something like, I don't know if I want to tell you this, or, I don't really like talking about it, or I'm generally a skeptic, but I don't, this thing happened to me. Those are the kind of like premises to stories, both in fiction and in natural storytelling and in oral storytelling. And, when people are telling their accounts, that really kind of set the mood to make it even more terrifying. So I think that's why that one has always sort of, shall I say, haunted me above all others. And that I remember it so well because, well, one, I probably made him tell me it like 10 times just to get things right. And then when I put it, it's in the book. So what I did with all the contributor stories that I had in the book is I called the people up, or I sat down with them, and then I asked them to tell me the story. And I totally did it the hard way, but I took longhand notes of their story, and then I typed it up. So it was sort of like, as told to me, this is my interpretation of what you said, and then I would type it up to them and have them, come back to me with, did I get a sequence of events? Did I miss this wrong? Did I kind of mix this up? And we'd go back and forth a little bit. So in addition to him telling it to me several times, I actually wrote it out, and really every time I even tell it, it just kind of makes me feel, and I don't get scared easily, but it does give me this kind of like crushing feeling, across my chest, like, something really, really, really supernatural is still hovering out there. And he hasn't heard it since. I have never heard it on his property, but there's this feeling that it could happen anytime. You don't know when to expect it, which gives it even more, like, it just kind of ups the creep factor. And it's got a real Lovecrafty and kind of like the thing that moaned on the mountain element to it that remain, and it's got this great, totally unexplained. We cannot explain it. I think with ghost stories, we can explain that there's, at least we can identify it as a ghost story, but when it's some sort of like thing moaning, shaking your cabin that, can't be explained, then it makes it that much more intriguing.
Oh, I agree.
So what can you tell us about mermaids?
So what, you got like 7 hours? No. So one thing that I really, like, my main message with mermaids, and when I wrote Among the Mermaids, why I chose to write a book just about one specific kind of creature, because a lot of my other books are kind of, combos, is that I really felt that mermaids get too much, like, glory in the idea that they are these pretty, lovely, singing things that hang out with crustaceans and play like bongo drums under the sea. The original story of The Little Mermaid, if you've ever read it, is pretty gruesome. I mean, every step she takes on land is like dagger stabbing into her feet, and she walks until her feet are bleeding. That was a story that I read as a very young child, actually was read to me by my mother. And I never forgot those details. They always haunted me. So I always had this idea of, an interest in mermaids. But I think it's important for people to understand that, there's a very, very dark side to mermaids and the marrow. And there are many, many very disturbing tales. And they are often very beautiful because that's how they snag you. That's how they get you. And, they want to sort of, oh, come here. Oh, I'm stuck. Can you just help me into the water? Let me just can we hug? And then the next thing you know, you're what, you can't breathe underwater? I didn't know that. I want you to come with me. You do have some instances of mermaids actually being guides and positive relationships with certain peoples and the mermaids in the part of the country or the part of the world where they live, and being able to kind of leave offerings and have an abundance from the sea. And so they are protectors in many ways, but more often than not, they are kind of, innocently evil, I guess, in a way, innocently malevolent. And you also have, of course, we have this picture of beautiful mermaids, but there are a lot of really gruesome descriptions of mermaids that look nice at first, but actually when you get closer have like snaggling, snarling teeth, and they kind of like morph into something, like show their true nature. And then, of course, you have, a lot of the mermen are depicted in similar ways. They might be relatively handsome, nice washboard abs from all that swimming. But upon closer inspection, you see that they have more of a head of some kind of gnarly beast, or they might flash those snaggly teeth and then sort of devour you. So I guess that's my important message about mermaids, is that they're not all like delightful little things that sit on a rock and wait and call out to the tourists and say hello. They really have there's a lot of dark history there. And the other interesting thing that I discovered in writing about mermaids is that, so I talk about some like living mermaids, like people who are actually mermaid activists, and, they swim in tails, and they do, they might do shows or things like that, or contests, but overall their mission is really to protect the waters. And so you have a lot of cool people like that. And there's also some kind of interesting people that, like humans, that sort of appear in a very, to kind of give evidence that mermaids could be real. One of them are the Haneo, who live they're divers from Korea. And they actually live on Jeju Island is where they're from. And it's this practice that is passed down from generation to generation, from grandmother to mother to daughter. It's generally all women, and they're free diving. They train themselves, and they train children the daughters from a young age to hold their breath and free dive down, and they dive, and they get abalone and, whatever kind of, seaweed, things that the coral, things that they're harvesting from the sea that they live on, or maybe they are able to sell and make some money, clams, all those kinds of things. But they can actually, some of them can dive. Nowadays they wear like a wetsuit, and they will wear goggles. But of course, traditionally they might cover themselves in like some kind of fat and like a skin of some kind if the temperature of the water is low. But they can actually free dive for up to 65 feet down. And they can hold their breath for 2 to 3 minutes underwater, and some of them can train themselves to hold their breath for up to 10 minutes. So this is a kind of just showing that when you practice and you practice and you practice, and you become a better swimmer, that you can actually, for 10 minutes, try holding your breath, count to 10 or 15. That's difficult. And that's to dive down, free dive down, and be able to hold your breath. That kind of shows that there is this capacity that we have as humans to actually, we have it in us to be able to do that. It is humanly possible to do something that's much more mermaid-like and be underwater for 10 minutes without an air tank. You also have people in the Moken people, and they're from Southeast Asia in a little island off the coast of Thailand, and they have better eyesight. They're always in like scientific journals, and every once in a while they pop up in National Geographic, or you read about them in studies by ophthalmologists and things, because they actually have better eyesight underwater. And it's something that it's not just like the older people who've been underwater. It's like the children are even born like that. They have incredible underwater vision, like exceptional underwater vision. And this has been something that they have evolved genetically over, all of these years out of the need to survive, because they live on this little island and they go underwater and they get, their food and their medicine and all of the things from the sea. So again, you have sort of, I guess, scientific evidence that that humans have the capacity to live underwater in that way. I found that really interesting, and that was something I didn't know about until I wrote the book. I was just kind of like, what else is out there about mermaids? And I happened to read this article about the Haneo women, and that sort of led me down that path of like, okay, what else can people do today that sort of shows that there's this relationship with the sea that, we have the ability to do some of the things that, the average person, that humans have the ability to do things that the average person can't necessarily do without a bunch of equipment. So I found that really interesting. So the book is kind of a combination of, wonderful old mermaid stories that we all love, like some great old Irish ones. This wonderful one called Florrie Cotillion's Funeral, and it's by T. Crofton Croker. He also wrote The Soul Cages and several other sort of mermaid-themed stories. And it's about this guy who's basically drinking whiskey down on the beach, and old Florrie Cotillion, who had been, always reputed to be probably a mermaid, or there was some, a town gossip that she was a mermaid, or her father had married a mermaid. Anyway, her coffin is laid out, kind of on the rocks and near the sea. It was just part of the custom. And he's laying down there drinking on the beach, and he sees these sort of white figures rise out of the sea and surround the coffin and bring it out to sea. And he kind of witnesses the whole thing. And so this is just one of the stories I included in there. And then there's actually even a couple stories about people who had mermaid encounters and actually saw some creatures that were mermaids, and they gave me permission to share their stories. And that was hard to find. It was real hard to find people who would admit that they actually saw a mermaid, that, they had some kind of encounter, much like someone might have had a Bigfoot encounter. I think, one, I think it's rarer, and two, I think people don't like to talk about it because they're even people who are very interested in the paranormal and the supernatural and cryptids, when you start talking about mermaids, they immediately just, no, that they can't possibly be real. They kind of dismisses that idea. You're just talking about the folklore. You're just talking about, these old-fashioned stories. But, there are a lot of people who actually have had those experiences or had unexplained things in the sea. Plus, we we discover and pull out crazy creatures from the ocean every day that live way down in crevices we were never able to get to before. So you never know what you're going to find in the ocean. And I think it kind of is this wonderful idea that it's just this vast thing, and out there somewhere we could at some point discover an actual mermaid or evidence of a mermaid. So it's pretty, I don't know, it's fun, but it's also something that I think is entirely possible. So
I agree with you 100%. But we're almost out of time, so what I'll do is I'll ask you, what is your plans for the rest of the year, and if you got any projects that you're working on that you can discuss real quick. And also, if anyone's got any questions or want to get in contact with you or send you an email saying, how could you do that show with that guy? How could they get a hold of you?
In a thong, and what were you wearing? Oh yeah. Oh, okay. So you can look on my website, which you mentioned at the beginning of the show. It's myname.net. So it's Varla, Varla Ventura, Ventura, and that is where I kind of keep what I'm on amazing radio shows like this, and what kind of projects I'm working on, excerpts from books and appearances, which I don't make a lot of appearances, but it does happen from time to time. I get my thong out. And you can reach me. I don't think you can reach me through the website. I've never had any success with that, but I do have a Facebook page, and you can send messages there. And then my email is, if you can spell my first name and my last name at Gmail, you'll be able to get in touch with me. So that's a great way. And I welcome correspondence with people who have had experiences, or people who have read the books and have questions or want to know more. And yeah, so as far as the rest of the year, I have a number of radio shows and things of that nature coming up. In October, I usually do a lot of radio, and then I spend a lot of time just concentrating on making my house extra Halloween-y. And other than that, I'm working on another book idea right now, and I'm not sure how cooked it is, but it's I think it's going to be on pirates. I think that would lend itself very nicely to it could be a nice companion to the mermaid book. So that's I'm just working on some new book ideas and book proposals, and actually doing a lot of writing right now. So I don't have anything new coming out, but I'm enjoying promoting the book and talking about, the paranormal parlor and all of that great stuff, and just getting to know other people. I've never been on your show before. I never met the two of you, so it's always nice to kind of expand that network and get to know people. And as I'm hoping to get my podcast back up and running in the next month or so. I actually have a super amazing 2-part California. It's a 2-part episode. There's 2 episodes. I'm just, I've got some technical stuff I've got to do with it. So that's on my agenda as I'm, writing and working on things like that. And thank you so much for having. What a fun. I mean, I feel like I just blabbed, but it's been really fun just talking about all the different topics and just jumping from book to book. It's been great.
Thank you for coming on the show, and I might be hollering at you to come back on the show for Halloween.
I would love that. Yeah, yes, I would love that. I do get a lot more requests in October, I guess, because of the freaky nature of things, So it's great. It's a great time. Even people who aren't that interested in this kind of thing, around Halloween time, they become more interested, and so it can be really fun. And we've got Halloween lore, and I'm sure that we can talk more about any of these creatures and all of these creatures, and maybe just come up with some really spooky stuff right before Halloween. That'd be really fun. We can try and compile our most terrifying things and warn people to, put cotton in their children's ears as we talk.
I don't think people let their kids listen to my show. Even my granddaughter's like, Papa, I hate it when you do your show. Because it takes time away from her.
Well, that's a sweet reason to hate it. That's she'll listen when she's older.
We can also talk about
me.
The dark side of Christmas.
Like Krampus?
Oh, so
Halloween and Krampus going into the holiday season.
Yeah, Yeah, I have a lot of, actually, I did a couple of short ebooks just on some, and I think it's in the Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings book, I actually talk about some interesting Christmas traditions, like I do talk about Krampus a little bit, but the Scandinavian Christmas troll, and this wonderful excerpt that actually, Melinda, you would love. It's like at Christmas time, actually, on Christmas Eve, it was like you were not supposed to go out at night because you'd find witches riding trolls in the woods in like this cavorting ritual. I mean, it's just wonderful. So we'll save that for the holiday season.
We'll have you on before Halloween, and then we'll have
Halloween
you on before Christmas.
And then for Christmas. I would love that. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah,
I would love to come back.
Oh, thank you so much.
Fun host.
I tend to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really fun night. 2 hours just rolled right by, huh?
Oh, it does. It sometimes, now and then I have. It's rare that we have at one guest that, you ask a question and they give you like a sentence and you're like, okay, can you go
like,
in a little bit more?
It? Yeah. Why didn't I have a pre-call with this person?
No shit. But you did great, and I appreciate you so much for coming on the show. I had nothing but mad respect for you and your work you're doing, and you keep it up. And like I said, I'll work out some dates for you and send it to you for near Christmas and near Halloween.
Great. That'd be great. And the feeling's mutual. And thank you both for having me. I really had a great time tonight.
Oh, we did too. Well, you have a good night, and don't let no bed bugs bite.
And if they do, hit them with a shoe.
Well, you have a good and take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much. Night night.
Good night.
Okay, everybody. I want to thank Varla. I got it right that time. Varla for coming on the show. We have nothing but mad respect for her.
It's definitely one of my favorites.
Let's see. Our guest for next Thursday night, August 16th, will be a local business manager, David Bowling. So y'all turn into that, and there'll be probably more cussing and all that good stuff. So everyone have a good night, have a great weekend, and all that good shit. You got anything you want to say?
Good night, everyone.
She does it so sweet. That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services. Thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Amazon has everything for back to school. Zebra lunchbox? Check. Cool Adidas gear like t-shirts, shoes, and backpacks? Check. Triceratops folders and pencils? Check. Laser Cat t-shirts? Check. Get your back to school shopping done now at amazon.com/back-to-school and enjoy free shipping on millions of items. No need to leave your home or hassle with crowds. Amazon.com. No better place to get everything back to school from A to Z.